They came to America believing they already knew the ending. The stadiums would be enormous but empty of emotion. The screens would be bright, but the traditions would feel artificial. The food would be excessive, the entertainment would be commercial, and the people would treat the World Cup like another temporary show designed to sell tickets, merchandise, and television subscriptions. America had money, they said. America had spectacle. But America had no real culture. That belonged to Europe. It belonged to ancient streets, neighborhood pubs, family rivalries, inherited scarves, and stadiums where generations had stood beneath the same roof. It belonged to communities where football was not something people watched for entertainment. It was something they carried from childhood to old age. America could build arenas. Europe built identity. That was the argument. Then the World Cup arrived, and one small town in Kansas quietly destroyed it. Not New York, not Los Angeles, not Miami, not one of the famous American cities that appears in movies, music videos, and travel advertisements. The place that forced people to reconsider everything was Lawrence, Kansas, a college town that most international supporters had never heard of before the tournament. It had no legendary European-style football club, no century-old soccer stadium, no global skyline, and no obvious reason to become one of the most emotional stories of the World Cup. Then Algeria arrived. The Algerian national team selected Lawrence as its tournament base, using the city as the place where its players would train, recover, prepare, and return between matches. What began as a logistical arrangement soon became something far more personal. According to FIFA, approximately 2,500 supporters attended a community training session, and the team repeatedly spoke about feeling at home in a city thousands of miles from Algeria. But the number alone does not explain what happened. A crowd can attend an event without creating a relationship. People can buy tickets, take photographs, collect autographs, and return home without remembering much of what they felt. Lawrence did something different. The town did not simply watch Algeria. It adopted Algeria. Flags appeared. Green and white clothing appeared. Local businesses created merchandise. Families began learning about the team. Children who had never visited North Africa started recognizing Algerian players. Residents stood outside in difficult weather to welcome the team. Some became so emotional that videos of their reactions spread far beyond Kansas. One widely shared scene showed an elderly local man overcome with emotion as Algeria arrived in Lawrence during rain and thunderstorms. The Guardian described the relationship as one of the tournament's most unexpected love stories, a bond between an Algerian team and a Kansas community that outsiders had never expected to understand each other. And suddenly, the joke about America having no culture did not sound quite as clever. Because culture is not only the age of a building, it is not only the number of years a song has been sung, it is not only the history printed inside a museum or the traditions passed through one family. Culture is also behavior. It is how people respond when strangers arrive. It is whether they ignore them, tolerate them, profit from them, or make space for them. Lawrence made space. The European criticism of American sporting culture had always contained a piece of truth. American sports are different. The language is different. The rituals are different. The stadium experience is different. In much of Europe, football culture grows from neighborhoods. Clubs often represent geography, class, politics, family history, and local memory. Supporters do not necessarily choose their clubs after comparing options. They inherit them. A grandfather takes his son. The son later takes his daughter. The same scarf appears in family photographs separated by 50 years. The same song is repeated by people who may no longer remember who first began singing it. The stadium becomes more than a building. It becomes a container for memory. American sport developed through different institutions: schools, universities, cities, franchises, community leagues, marching bands, parking lot gatherings, regional rivalries, state pride, family traditions built around Saturday afternoons, Sunday evenings, or college homecoming weekends. To an outsider searching for European football culture, these rituals can appear strange. A giant parking lot does not resemble a historic pub district. A university mascot does not resemble a club badge carried through generations. A tailgate does not resemble supporters marching through narrow streets toward an old stadium. So some visitors made a simple mistake. They searched for Europe inside America. When America failed to resemble Europe, they concluded that America had nothing. But unfamiliar culture is not the same as no culture. Lawrence was about to demonstrate the difference. When the Algerian players first arrived, the town could have treated them like temporary celebrities. A few photographs, a formal welcome, a press release from local officials, some branded signs. Then everyone could have returned to normal life. But the team's presence slowly changed the rhythm of the city. People began discussing Algeria in coffee shops and local businesses. Residents followed the tournament with a new emotional investment. The team was no longer an abstract group of international athletes passing through Kansas. They had become the team training nearby, the team whose buses residents recognized, the team whose supporters had entered local restaurants, the team whose players interacted with children, the team connected to new faces, new conversations, and new memories. That distinction matters. Entertainment remains distant. Belonging becomes personal. When people consume entertainment, they ask whether it impressed them. When they form a relationship, they ask whether the other person feels safe, respected, and remembered. Lawrence stopped asking what Algeria could provide. It began asking what Algeria needed: a welcoming crowd, visible support, a familiar color in an unfamiliar country, a place that did not feel temporary every time the players returned from a match. Algeria responded. The team acknowledged the support. Players and staff spoke warmly about the city. Supporters from across the United States began traveling to Lawrence because the town had become an unexpected center of Algerian World Cup life. Local reporting described fans arriving from different areas and explaining that the community's warmth had made Lawrence a destination of its own. This was not a one-way story in which generous Americans welcomed passive visitors. Algerian supporters transformed Lawrence too. They brought songs, flags, food, language, celebration, and an emotional intensity shaped by their own football history. They made the town louder. They filled public spaces with a form of energy residents had not experienced before. They allowed local families to encounter Algeria, not as a distant country appearing in news reports, but as a living community standing beside them. That is what cultural exchange actually looks like. It is not two groups politely observing one another from opposite sides of a barrier. It is confusion, questions, mispronounced words, shared meals, unexpected laughter, people trying to understand the meaning of a chant, children asking why a flag has particular colors, visitors discovering local traditions, residents learning that the outsiders are not as different as they appeared from a distance. Nobody needs to surrender identity. Algerians did not need to become American. Lawrence residents did not need to pretend they had supported Algeria for decades. The connection became powerful precisely because it was new. They were choosing one another without inherited obligation. That choice gave the story its emotional force. European football culture often celebrates loyalty that has survived generations. That deserves respect. But there is another kind of loyalty that can be equally revealing. The loyalty a person chooses when there is no family expectation, no social pressure, no childhood history, no requirement. A Kansas resident did not have to care about Algeria. That is why caring mattered. A local child did not have to learn an Algerian player's name. That is why learning it became meaningful. A family did not have to attend a training session for a foreign team. That is why showing up became a gesture rather than a routine. Every old tradition began with someone performing an action for the first time. Every famous football song was once unfamiliar. Every historic rivalry had a first meeting. Every scarf now treated as sacred was once newly produced fabric. Traditions do not arrive already ancient. People create them. Then they repeat them. Then they tell stories about them. Eventually, the beginning disappears, and the ritual seems as if it has always existed. Lawrence allowed the world to witness a beginning. The small town was not borrowing someone else's history. It was creating a new shared memory in real time. And because everyone knew the tournament was temporary, every moment carried additional weight. The team would eventually leave. The supporters would return home. The training field would become quiet again. The special merchandise would stop feeling new. The flags would come down. The city would return to its normal rhythm. Temporary experiences often become more emotionally intense because people know they cannot be preserved. A normal day can be ignored. A final day cannot. When time becomes limited, small details become visible. The way a player stops to sign a child's shirt. The way an elderly resident watches the team bus arrive. The way supporters embrace after recognizing one another's colors. The way a local business owner speaks proudly about visitors who were strangers weeks earlier. The way people remain after an event because nobody wants to be the first to admit it is ending. That is why goodbyes reveal the truth of a welcome. At the beginning, Lawrence had hosted a team. By the end, it had people it did not want to lose. This was the part that left critics with nothing to say. They could dismiss America's stadiums as money. They could dismiss giant screens as technology. They could dismiss tailgates as excessive parties. They could dismiss friendly service as something workers were paid to perform. They could dismiss tournament branding as corporate spectacle. But tears are more difficult to dismiss. Tears do not prove that every emotion is pure. They do not prove that every person experienced the relationship in the same way. But they do reveal that something moved beyond transaction. Someone had become attached. Someone felt seen. Someone understood that an unlikely connection was about to become a memory. And that raised an uncomfortable question. What exactly did the critics mean when they said America had no culture? Did they mean America had no European culture? That was true. Did they mean the country lacked medieval town centers, century-old football institutions, and ancient local rituals? In many places, that was also true. But did they mean Americans were incapable of community, identity, hospitality, memory, celebration, and emotional attachment? Lawrence was standing in front of them as evidence that this was false. The accusation had always depended on a narrow definition. European traditions were treated as culture because they were old. American traditions were treated as entertainment because they were newer. A European supporter gathering outside a stadium was passion. An American supporter gathering beside a vehicle was a tailgate. A European supporter gathering beside a vehicle was a tailgate. An American supporter gathering beside a vehicle was a tailgate. An American supporter gathering beside a vehicle was a tailgate. A European supporter gathering beside a vehicle was a tailgate. An American supporter gathering beside a vehicle was a tailgate. European civic pride was identity. American civic pride was often dismissed as loud nationalism. The same human behaviors received different interpretations because one side had been granted historical dignity while the other had been reduced to stereotype. Lawrence did not need to win that argument through words. The town simply behaved in a way the stereotype could not explain. Local residents stood beside Algerian supporters. Businesses displayed Algerian symbols. Families attended team events. People traveled to participate. The players recognized the affection. The community reacted emotionally. No ancient stone walls were required. No 100-year-old football anthem was needed. The town had attention. And attention may be one of the rarest forms of modern generosity. Large cities can impress visitors with attractions. Small communities can impress visitors by noticing them. In a global city, an international team may disappear into the scale. Thousands of different stories compete at the same time. In Lawrence, Algeria's presence was visible. Residents saw the supporters. They heard the songs. They recognized the buses. They encountered visitors inside ordinary businesses. The World Cup was not occurring only inside a distant stadium. It had entered daily life. That closeness transformed everyone involved. Algerian supporters were not simply tourists buying products and leaving. They became part of conversations. Lawrence was no longer merely a place selected for practical reasons. It became part of Algeria's tournament identity. This is how places become meaningful. Not because a map says they are important, because something happened there that people cannot reproduce elsewhere. Most international visitors probably never imagined Kansas as the location where they would experience one of the tournament's deepest emotional connections. New York was expected to be memorable. Miami was expected to be exciting. Los Angeles was expected to feel cinematic. A Kansas town becoming a second home was not expected. Unexpected affection often survives longer than expected admiration. When a famous city impresses you, the experience confirms what you already believed. When an unfamiliar place reaches you emotionally, it changes your map of the world. Lawrence became such a place. The tournament also revealed a broader truth about America. The country's culture can be difficult to summarize because it does not come from one source. It contains native histories, African American traditions, European immigration, Latin American influence, Asian American communities, Caribbean communities, religious diversity, regional identities, rural customs, urban subcultures, college traditions, military traditions, artistic movements, and food shaped by generations of cultural exchange. The country contains jazz clubs and county fairs, mosques and megachurches, cowboy rodeos and Wall Street offices, Polish neighborhoods in Chicago, Cajun music in Louisiana, Mexican-American communities across the Southwest, Caribbean traditions in New York and Florida, Scandinavian festivals in the Midwest, Algerian flags in Kansas. A visitor looking for one single American culture will repeatedly fail. That failure may appear to confirm that no culture exists. In reality, the problem is the opposite. There is too much to fit inside one definition. America often feels contradictory because its identities are constantly meeting, competing, combining, and changing one another. The country can be deeply divided and unusually welcoming at the same time. It can be highly commercial and emotionally sincere inside the same event. It can struggle with inequality while ordinary people display remarkable generosity. It can misunderstand the rest of the world while still allowing people from the rest of the world to become part of its communities. Contradiction does not mean emptiness. It means the country cannot be reduced to one clean story. International visitors during the tournament repeatedly described encountering an America more welcoming and complicated than the one they had expected from political news and social media. Reports documented strangers providing recommendations, residents sharing meals, and visitors discovering daily American life beyond the country's familiar global clichés. That does not mean the negative headlines were invented. America has serious problems. Political division is real. Violence is real. Inequality is real. Travel restrictions affected who could participate in the tournament. Ticket prices made attendance difficult for ordinary supporters. Distances between host cities created major logistical challenges. Public transportation did not always meet the expectations of visitors accustomed to European rail systems. A beautiful relationship in Kansas cannot erase these realities. Nor should it. A credible documentary cannot turn one emotional story into proof that an entire country is flawless. Lawrence is not every American town. Not every visitor received the same welcome. Not every community participated. Not every supporter left with a positive opinion. The lesson is not that all criticism of America was wrong. The lesson is that the criticism was incomplete. There is an important difference. A person can criticize ticket pricing without claiming Americans do not care about football. A visitor can dislike the transportation system without declaring the society culturally empty. A supporter can prefer European stadiums while acknowledging that American communities create meaningful sporting rituals of their own. A country does not have to be perfect before its people are allowed to be human. The phrase, "America has no culture," avoids complexity. It replaces hundreds of millions of people with a convenient insult. It allows the speaker to feel knowledgeable without becoming curious. Curiosity requires effort. It requires asking why people gather, what they remember, which teams matter to them, What food belongs to a region? What music emerged from its history? Where residents go when a family needs help? How communities respond when outsiders arrive? Culture is not always arranged for tourists. Sometimes it must be entered. You can drive through an American town and see chain restaurants, wide roads, shopping centers, gas stations, and repeated architecture. From the highway, many places may look similar. The difference appears after you stop. Speak to the people. Attend the local event. Ask what the town celebrates. Ask what the town celebrates. Ask what the town celebrates. Ask which families built the businesses. Ask what happens on game day. Ask who receives food when someone becomes sick. Ask where people gather after a death. Ask which tradition makes residents return home after years away. Culture is rarely hiding because it is weak. Sometimes it is hidden because it was not created for strangers to consume quickly. Lawrence gave international visitors a rare opportunity to enter. Football opened the door. Hospitality kept it open. The World Cup is usually remembered through enormous sporting moments. A winning goal, a missed penalty, a goalkeeper's save, a captain raising the trophy, a defeated player sitting alone on the grass. Those images become part of global history. But people who travel to tournaments often remember smaller moments with greater emotional clarity. A stranger translating a sign, a driver refusing payment for a short journey, a family sharing food, a child asking for a photograph, a local supporter showing visitors the safest route home, a bartender changing the television to another team's match, a conversation continuing after everyone has forgotten how it began. The football creates the journey. Human beings create the memory. Lawrence created memories that existed beyond match results. When Algeria eventually left the tournament after a round of 32 defeat to Switzerland, the town's farewell carried the weight of a relationship that had developed throughout the competition. Local coverage described Lawrence saying goodbye to a team that had become its unexpected friend. A result ended the campaign. It did not end the meaning. This is another lesson football supporters already understand. A team does not need to win the trophy for the journey to matter. Victory creates celebration. Defeat often reveals loyalty. Anyone can appear during success. Attachment becomes visible when people remain after disappointment. Lawrence had no obligation to continue caring once Algeria could no longer advance. Yet the emotional connection did not disappear with the final whistle. The team's tournament record would become a line in history. The town's experience would survive in stories. I was there when they arrived. I attended the training session. My child met the players. We wore their colors. They made our town feel connected to the world. We did not expect to care this much. We did not want them to leave. That is how memory becomes tradition. Not through official declarations. Through repetition. People tell the story. Children hear it. Photographs remain. Signed shirts are framed. A scarf stays inside a home. Years later, someone mentions Algeria, and a person in Kansas immediately remembers a particular summer. The relationship may never repeat in exactly the same way. That does not make it meaningless. A sunset does not lose value because it ends. A tournament does not become worthless because another one arrives 4 years later. Temporary experiences can shape people permanently. Lawrence's story also challenged the idea that authentic culture must be ancient. Age can deepen meaning, but age does not automatically create sincerity. A ritual repeated for centuries can become empty when nobody remembers why it matters. A new gesture can become profound when everyone understands exactly why it is being made. The gestures in Kansas were new. Their meaning was immediate. Residents were not pretending they had always loved Algeria. The honesty of the story came from the opposite. They had only recently discovered the team, yet they chose to care. That choice was visible. It included awkwardness. People mispronounced names. They asked basic questions. They attempted songs they did not fully understand. They learned the symbolism of unfamiliar colors. They made mistakes. But sincerity does not require perfection. In fact, imperfect effort often appears more genuine because everyone can see the distance a person is attempting to cross. An American resident who already knew everything about Algerian football would not be surprising. A resident who knew almost nothing but decided to learn. That is the story. Cynicism can feel intelligent because it protects a person from embarrassment. The skeptic rarely risks looking naive. He laughs first. He assumes every emotional moment is marketing. Every public gesture is performance. Every expression of kindness hides a selfish motive. Then a scene appears that does not fit. An elderly man standing in bad weather because a foreign team is arriving. A child wearing unfamiliar colors. A local community filling a training session. Visitors speaking about feeling at home. People crying during a goodbye. The cynic must either revise the opinion or invent increasingly complicated explanations to protect it. Perhaps everyone wanted attention. Perhaps businesses only wanted money. Perhaps the cameras created the emotion. Perhaps the whole thing was temporary. Some of those factors may have existed. Human motives are rarely pure. A business can benefit economically and still welcome visitors sincerely. A resident can enjoy attention and also form a real connection. A supporter can film a moment and genuinely feel it. Commercialization and emotion can exist in the same place. If culture required completely pure motives, almost no tradition on earth would qualify. Football itself is surrounded by money. Clubs sell shirts. Broadcasters sell subscriptions. Sponsors place logos everywhere. Tickets become increasingly expensive. None of that automatically proves that the supporter's love is fake. The institution can be commercial. The human emotion inside it can remain real. The World Cup provided the event. Lawrence supplied the soul. FIFA could select a base camp. It could organize a training session. It could create signs and schedules. It could not command residents to care. Care cannot be guaranteed through a contract. Tears cannot be placed on an official timetable. Friendship cannot be manufactured simply because an organization prints the word unity beside a logo. Unity occurs through specific actions. Someone decides to attend. Someone raises a flag. Someone opens a business early. Someone speaks to a visitor. Someone offers help. A player notices. A supporter responds. The actions repeat until a relationship forms. This is why the story became larger than Algeria and Lawrence. It reminded people what football culture is supposed to accomplish. Football is often described through competition. One team defeats another. One nation celebrates while another suffers. Rivalries give the sport intensity. But the game also creates permission for strangers to connect emotionally. Adults paint their faces. They sing publicly. They embrace people they met minutes earlier. They cry without hiding. They invest meaning in colors, symbols, and names. For 90 minutes, individuals become a crowd. Lawrence extended that permission beyond the stadium. The town began behaving like a football community without needing a century-old professional club. Different people moved in one emotional direction. They wanted the visitors to feel supported. The relationship showed that sporting culture is not defined only by what happens during the match. It is also what happens around the match. Before it, after it. Between the people who may never appear on the television broadcast. The giant stadium can create awe. A small gesture creates attachment. A massive screen can impress a visitor. A personal goodbye can remain with them for life. The Europeans who expected America to overwhelm them with scale encountered something more powerful. Attention. The highways were as large as expected. The stadiums were enormous. The portions were excessive. The advertisements were everywhere. But beneath that visible America existed another country. A person asking where you came from. A family inviting you to join them. A community celebrating another nation's identity. A local resident openly admitting that a temporary visitor had changed the town. This was not the America critics had prepared themselves to dislike. It was more difficult, more contradictory, and far more human. The phrase, "America has no culture," had also misunderstood American openness. Some cultures protect identity through boundaries. Participation requires history, family, language, or long-term membership. American communities can have boundaries too, but they also possess a powerful habit of allowing new participants to enter before every difference has been resolved. Sometimes all a person needs to do is show up. That openness can appear superficial. How can someone call you a friend after knowing you for 10 minutes? How can a town support a team it discovered weeks earlier? How can people express affection so quickly? European restraint may interpret speed as insincerity. Yet rapid welcome does not automatically mean shallow attachment. Sometimes it means the community has decided that belonging should begin before the visitor has earned it. You are here, therefore you can stand with us. You are far from home, therefore we will try to make this feel like home. You support this team. Teach us why. Show us the song. Explain the flag. Tell us which player matters. Try our food. Let us try yours. The invitation is not always spoken. It is communicated through behavior. Lawrence communicated it clearly. This is what hospitality actually requires. Not a smile because a company demands it. Hospitality requires attention, time, curiosity, patience, and the willingness to risk awkwardness. It means adjusting your world to create space for someone else. The town adjusted. Algerian supporters adjusted too. They allowed local people into their emotional experience. They did not guard their football identity as something Americans were unworthy of touching. They shared it. The bridge held because both sides walked toward the center. That is why the story cannot be reduced to American generosity. It was mutual recognition. Algeria brought Lawrence into its World Cup journey. Lawrence brought Algeria into its local history. Both gained something they could not have created alone. The critics had imagined culture as a possession, something one country owned more deeply than another. But culture is not a tournament table. One tradition does not earn points by declaring another tradition inferior. European football culture remains extraordinary. Its stadiums, songs, rivalries, histories, and intergenerational loyalty deserve admiration. American sporting culture does not need to defeat it. Algerian supporter culture does not need to imitate either side. The meeting created something additional, a shared memory belonging to everyone present. No winner was required. Pride becomes insecurity when another culture must be declared empty for your own culture to remain valuable. Lawrence offered a more confident alternative. We know who we are. You know who you are. Come stand beside us. Difference was not the obstacle. Difference gave the relationship meaning. If Kansas and Algeria had shared the same history, language, food, weather, and football memories, the welcome would have been ordinary. The emotional power came from distance voluntarily crossed. A resident chose to wear unfamiliar colors. A supporter chose to trust an unfamiliar town. A player acknowledged people with whom he had no previous connection. A child selected a new hero. Each decision became a small bridge. Together, those bridges carried an entire community. This is why the tears mattered. They were not proof that America had won an imaginary cultural battle against Europe. They were proof that human beings still possess the ability to surprise one another. Modern life constantly presents people through categories: American, European, Algerian, conservative, liberal, urban, rural, religious, secular, local, foreign. The categories become shortcuts. Shortcuts become assumptions. Assumptions become certainty. Real contact ruins the simplicity. The Algerians in Lawrence were no longer an abstract national team. They became players, supporters, families, guests, and friends. Lawrence was no longer an anonymous piece of Middle America. It became the place that showed up, the place that waited, the place that learned, the place that cared enough for the goodbye to hurt. Travel is most powerful when a location stops being a name and becomes a relationship. The World Cup made that possible. Not perfectly, not equally, not without commercial exploitation or political controversy. But in specific moments, ordinary people took control of the tournament's meaning. They turned a global event into a local memory. They created value that could not be measured through ticket sales or television ratings. And that may be the final answer to the accusation. Culture is not measured only by how old your buildings are. It is revealed by how quickly your strangers become neighbors. Lawrence did not need ancient walls. It needed people willing to notice. It did not need a 100-year-old football song. It needed voices willing to attempt a new one. It did not need inherited Algerian loyalty. It needed chosen loyalty. It did not need to prove that Kansas understood every detail of North African history. It needed enough humility to learn. The critics had looked backward, searching for history. Culture was happening in front of them. They had looked for monuments. Culture was an embrace. They had looked for tradition. Culture was the decision to begin one. They had looked for proof that America could copy Europe. The proof arrived when America stopped trying to be Europe. Lawrence welcomed Algeria in its own way. Directly. Openly. Without embarrassment. The town used what it already had: community organizations, local businesses, sporting facilities, families, volunteers, college town energy, and Midwestern hospitality. The result was not polished enough to feel manufactured. It felt alive. When the team's journey ended, the town's relationship with Algeria remained one of the tournament's most widely celebrated human stories. Reuters later included Lawrence's bond with Algeria among the feel-good moments that softened international perceptions of the United States during the World Cup. The World Cup eventually moved on. Another match dominated the news. Another controversy appeared. Another team captured attention. Global sporting memory is impatient. But local memory moves differently. Someone in Lawrence will pass the training field years later and remember the flags. A parent will find a photograph of a child beside an Algerian player. A scarf will remain inside a home. A business owner will remember the supporters who entered the shop. A visitor from Algeria will hear the word Kansas and think not of an empty landscape, but of a town that treated strangers like family. Official records will preserve results. They will list opponents, goals, group positions, and dates. They may never capture the emotional importance of what happened away from the pitch. Culture rarely fits inside official statistics. It survives through sentences. I was there. They welcomed us. We did not expect it. They learned our names. We wore their colors. They made us feel at home. We did not expect it. That is how a new tradition begins. And that is how one small American town answered an insult repeated for years. Not with anger, not with a lecture, not by claiming America was superior. With a welcome. European fans said America had no culture. Lawrence opened its doors. The critics expected artificial spectacle. They found genuine attachment. They expected ignorance. They found curiosity. They expected indifference. They found thousands of people. They expected America to turn the World Cup into a story about itself. They found a Kansas town proudly wearing the colors of Algeria. And when the time came to leave, the most powerful images were not of giant scoreboards or expensive stadiums. They were human faces, people embracing, people trying to smile, people wiping away tears. The real America did not defeat the visitors. It disarmed their certainty. Because it is difficult to continue mocking a place after that place has made someone feel at home. Perhaps the question was never whether America possessed culture. The question was whether outsiders were willing to recognize culture in a form they had not been taught to respect. Lawrence provided the answer. Culture is the song you inherit, but it is also the song you attempt to learn for a guest. It is the flag carried by your grandparents, but it is also the unfamiliar flag you raise, so someone far from home will not feel alone. It is a stadium filled with history, but it is also a training field where a new memory begins. It is pride in where you come from, but it is also confidence strong enough to make room for where someone else comes from. Europe brought its standards. Algeria brought its passion. Kansas brought its welcome. For one unforgettable period, All three became part of the same story. America did not need ancient walls to create it. It only needed people willing to show up. That is what left the critics silent. That is what left the town emotional. And that is what left people in tears. Which part of this story affected you most? The town adopting Algeria, Algerian supporters embracing Lawrence, or the idea that culture can be created between complete strangers? Share your answer in the comments. Like this video if it changed how you think about American culture, and send it to someone who believes meaningful traditions can exist only in old countries and famous cities. Subscribe to Modern World Insights. Because in the next documentary, we will reveal the American traditions European visitors mocked when they arrived, then desperately wanted to take home. This documentary presents cultural commentary based on publicly reported World Cup experiences. Individual experiences vary, and no single town or event can represent an entire country.